the word. What is a? What is a word? Is a?
Hey everyone, thanks very much for being here for our Power Chat. We're thrilled and honored and smitten to have Scott Wollschleger joining us for the next 30 minutes to chat about some of our work together and maybe Twitter a little bit. Jeff, you want to dive in with our first question?
Let's dive in. Let's assume the water's deep enough and just dive without checking. Scott, I wanted to ask you about our most recent collaboration, which is a piece called CVS that we have recorded and we are currently editing and getting ready to put out on our new record that'll be called Plays Well with Others. It has to do with the eponymous retail chain of pharmacies. And we've talked about this, you and I, before, that it's related also to a piece that you have called Dennys. I want to just ask you about why you're making pieces about CVS and Dennys.
Well, I ask myself this question every other day, and I'm glad that I've written them. I think with like Dennys, it was somewhat of a stretch to write a piece called Dennys, but I guess it's if we lived in Europe, we'd have like the Mona Lisa or like these like great cultural contributions, and in America we have Denny's, and that's kind of cool. Like Denny's is a real thing. It's a real cultural thing.
Do Europeans get drunk and then go eat at the Mona Lisa at 3 a.m?
It's a great diner, haven't you heard? So Denny's was more of an experiment, but it worked so well. And the formula for Denny's was basically the word Denny's is the main word that's repeated. In the piece Denny's, the main voice character is Sean Connery, which Sean Connery saying Denny's is it's an immediate, like, for some reason it works. I don't know why. And Denny's uses musically, it's based on the most like banal material. It's just like a blues scale that goes up and down. It goes up, and then you say Denny's, and it goes down, you say Denny's. And so in a sense, it was like the blues scale in this setting was like reminding me of being in like Guitar Center, when you hear like some kid or some dad or whatever just like trying to play the blues, and it's just like just the stupid scale. And that sort of, it's like a cultural object, right? It's like the Guitar Center guy playing the blues scale. So anyway, I think it's like these found objects that kind of construct the piece. And then for CVS, the idea was, okay, I want to kind of have an exploded Denny's. And honestly, I do not know why I chose CVS as the subject matter. Maybe because CVSs are so prevalent. Maybe they're cultural objects. I don't know. In CVS,
the piece is longer, the receipts are longer.
Yeah, and it's funny. I don't even look at the receipts. So the receipt jokes, I didn't. People kept making jokes about these receipts, and I was like, why are people making jokes about the receipts? Right. So, anyways, I guess the receipts are long. I don't even go to CVS, yeah. And so CVS uses a similar logic of sort of hyper banal musical material, and the main character in CVS is Bob Ross, who's another kind of American cultural artifact. And so in some way the pieces are, I guess, like a collage, almost like a dream collage of American stuff. And CVS ended up being way more beautiful than I expected. So it's like very bizarre, because it was supposed to be like maybe a little more banal than it is. So it's like this weird combination of like super beautiful and like very banal at the same time. So I think it works. I hope I don't get sued by all these corporations. So I don't know. I have to get a lawyer. I have no idea if it's even legal to do that.
When the record goes platinum, then we'll have the funds to deal with it.
I think it falls in the category of satire, maybe. But even though the works, they're actual serious works. But I think, I'll let you know if I need like a legal fund.
Should be a fair use under parody law if I've learned anything from Nathan for you.
Yes, yes. Okay, Will, you're hired as my attorney. Thank you for being my attorney.
This is going to work out great. I can just feel it.
I feel it too.
Scott, I was thinking, like, as I was sort of wrapping my head around what I kind of wanted to talk to you about or ask you about, I was thinking back through a handful of our collaborations. So we have What is the Word? The Loadbang piece from 6 years ago or so, maybe 2014 feels right. We have CVS, which is a year old. But then we've also played your music. Like I've played it with Karina and I, the duo, and in all of them, I was trying to come up with a common thread. And one of the things that I came to was this idea of like destruction or twisting of like very simple things, or things that maybe we take for granted. So, for instance, in What is the Word? It's essentially about aphasia, right? Or this the ability to create language, something that we take for granted, breaking down. In the duo, there's all of these unisons, but they're not unisons. You refer to them as dirty unisons.
Yeah.
I wonder is this a sort of conscious thread for you, or something generally you're interested in, or am I totally projecting?
Maybe a little of both, but both are good. I think with What is the Word and with the duo I wrote for you, I think the theme or the sort of like unifying thing with those is this sort of idea of like stumbling as creation, the idea of like a stutter as a creative thing. And I think like when we produce language or when we make something creative, I don't think, it doesn't come out right. It never comes out right. And so the stutter or the thing you're trying to get out, like the mess that comes out, is sort of the thing that I think is really interesting. I mean, I also love typos for this reason. Like I think they're a true blessing when you screw something up. And so I think, there's like obviously What is the Word's about aphasia, but it's a Samuel Beckett poem, and the poem was so good and so like powerful. That's why I set the poem, and then I learned it was about aphasia and the inability to like speak, and and that's reflected, I think, in the music too, where it's like unable to sort of just speak. And with the duo, I think it was a little bit of a different idea where what you're saying about taking something and then kind of breaking it up or exploding it. I think it's almost like I look for artifacts, and the artifacts I generate the artifacts, but I wait for it to become a mistake or become a unpredicted occurrence or something. So in some way, I look for musical typos when I'm making music, because I think the thing like I'm intending to make is really dumb usually, and the thing I make on accident is way more interesting. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's sort of my take on that.
I find that it's always kind of easy to see the flaws in things and to look at kind of the negative side of a CVS or a Denny's or a typo, but you really plumb deeper and find something that feels to me like a little transcendent about it. As you were going along, has this always been an idea you've been fascinated by, or did you find yourself gravitating towards it over time as you wrote newer and newer pieces?
I think that's a great question too. I think I gravitated towards it over time, mainly because I think, composers, we're looking for our language, or like, what is our language? And it's actually impossible to have like a universal language, or the idea of universality itself is somewhat up for debate. And I think I just happen to really be attracted to creative disaster. And not like in a premiere. Please don't, I don't want my premieres to be a creative disaster, but the process itself, the generation process, I find it really affirmative. And like, if I was religious, I would definitely say God is super into mistakes, so, I mean, not to get theological, but yeah.
I've heard though that God don't make no trash.
God, he doesn't make trash, but he definitely likes to make typos, So, but I don't know. Yeah. So something transcendental, I think. Well, yeah. I mean, there's something like beautiful, I guess, about taking a material or finding something that, well, one, yeah, nothing in the world has any innate meaning, right? So you find like a piece of like toilet paper on the ground, and I think we walk. Our brains are sort of, in a weird way, we're like children. We want to be like children and experience the world sort of fresh and exciting. But we see the toilet paper and now it's been coded as, well, if that's gross or that's whatever. And but it's sort of like there's a kind of galaxy brain way to interpret the world that's sort of radically not ruined yet. And you don't have to. I mean, I'm not saying I walk around looking at trash and being like, how wonderful, but I think finding beauty in abject or liminal spaces, or what I like to call negative spaces, has always just been interesting to me. And I think affirming those spaces can be really important. And especially like growing up in like in Pennsylvania, I grew up in Erie, PA, which is like, at the time I was growing up there, I was like, what a shithole, how awful, what a bad place. But now I'm looking back at it, I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I wish I would have kind of had this more open mindset of like, it's wonderful. It's like, they have pepperoni balls and like, we got a lake that's really shallow and like, there's lots of ice cream. And, so I think finding the beauty in things that don't necessarily want to be beautiful is also kind of the responsibility or whatever task of the artist. Like that's kind of what we do, is render things into like an aesthetic realm where beauty can be part of that.
I don't mean to step on a question that I know Jeff wanted to ask, but when you talk about like terms like galaxy brain and the way that you talk about finding the transcendence in the moments or the beautiness in the moments, to me, you belong to one of the first generation of like composers that's really almost internet based, or the internet kind of permeates the works in some ways.
Sure.
Like maybe Jennifer Walsh, Ben Davis, yourself, Matt Marks, who we all met, like kind of in the same vein. Can you maybe talk a little bit, how do you feel like the internet is affecting compositional processes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the internet's like the ocean, and like we're all in it. Like I think it's not like, I don't think the internet's something that like I'm engaging with. I think it's just such a pervasive thing in my reality now that I'm like forced to work with it, but it's not a conscious thing to be like internet culture. I just think it's actually the kind of fabric of reality is very much in the internet, and so it shows up. And also, like, I think I'm like open to the internet as a territory in a way where I'm like open to it kind of providing a sort of landscape in a way.
I wanted to ask briefly about what's driving your work forward right now. Where are you getting some of your inspiration at this moment, and what do you have coming up? What's next?
Well, that's a great question. I am writing a piece for Will for trombone and piano. So actually, that's been really awesome to be writing a piece of music and getting to know the trombone, which has been like my favorite thing in the world. I'm not allowed to write for tenor. I've been told by my composer friends that writing for tenor alto trombone is going to get me in trouble. So anyways, well, we'll talk about that later. But inspiration, not to be like contrarian, but I actually don't believe in inspiration. And I'm actually kind of like against inspiration in a way. Maybe I'm also super depressed, so that's also why. But I think inspiration, well, I don't know. I've never been inspired, I guess. I mean, I guess I could say like, I had a really great pizza that was inspiring. But with art, it's not, it's not about being inspired, because it's basically work, and it's just a deeper process. And what's keeping me inspired is nothing right now, right? I mean, like, it's just everything's so hard right now. I don't know. Like, I'll have to think more about that. But that one got me stumped. But usually,
how do you work then? When do you work? What do you do?
When I'm for writing, you mean, or
yeah?
I generally work in the morning, and it's a very messy process for me. I mean, it's like I'm gathering material and I'm just spreading it out, and then over time, like a world starts to form. So I have to get very familiar with the material I'm working with, and then it's almost like it's like building a set or like building something, but I have to really know the material in and out. And so a lot of my time is spent getting to understand the material I want to work with. And, you know, and then I stitch together, you know, things, and slowly it becomes a larger work. But I work very in fragmented, which may also be an internet influence too. Like, you know.
Do you think that, or I mean, even that's like film or sound editing too. That's just like post-production, right? Do you feel like your work is collage like that,
Yeah.
or like montage, or?
I think very much so, because, and not even so much intentionally. I don't think there's such a thing as you know, like linearity in the world, you know. And maybe this is becoming more obvious, or it's becoming more real, that like linear or whatever is sort of being like, you know, up for grabs now. But I don't think, you know, the idea that the artist or like a musical piece should be a continuous experience, I think I just don't think that's how humans are, how we are. I think we're a jumble of fragments that we kind of sew together, and, you know, call this jumble of fragments a self. And, you know, I don't have a real strong sense of like myself in that way too, you know? So I think the sort of like weird fragments of my music are also because, you know, my brain's like a little bit fragmented maybe. But I think collage is really beautiful though, because you can put things together next to each other that don't belong together. And when you do that, it creates some sort of interaction. And I think that kind of collision of difference can be really, can really be powerful, you know? And, you know, so yeah, it's like, I'm probably the opposite of a new age type of composer, you know, even though I'd love to write new age music. I tried, but it became CVS.
I wonder that, how do you, because in all the music of yours that I've played, there's this, the form feels so tight and clear and communicative. Do you think, how do you break up that idea of this sort of piecemeal work and putting things together versus like sense of overall form, or do you feel like it happens intuitively, or how do you plan for those?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like kind of like what I would want to call like pure intuition. And I think in some way, like everyone, you know, intuition is like given, everyone has it. You know, the problem I do have is I have a very Cajun approach to like construction, but I have preference as to what, you know, I think sounds good or bad. I'm actually really picky, you know. I mean, we've worked together, you know, I can be really fussy and my notation gets fussy. And so I for planning, it's all based on feel, but it also is based on, again, being really comfortable with the parameters of what the piece is. And I'll go through, I don't know, maybe like 60 different versions of a piece, like towards the end, finding just the right arrangement of all the, you know, all the sections. And I think like a piece like American Dream, which I wrote for Beethoven, is very much this, where I think it's maybe, you know, 20 or 15 or 20 episodes. And I had them written kind of like early on, but I didn't know the order. And you know, slowly I put them in order, and then it's there. And when it's right, I know it's right. And so, but it's a lot of experimentation, you know. Oh, what if this was, it's actually some of the best lessons I give to student composers is, you know, we're looking at their piece and they say, oh, look at my introduction, you know, it's an air sound. And then I'm like, wait, well, what if this thing that happens 15 bars later, what if the piece starts right there? Like, what if you just move it around? And most students would be like, that's insane. But I'm like, well, try it out, you know, and actually if students did that, their pieces would be way better, you know.
I noticed that when you bring up these ideas and we talk about the internet and we talk about the fragmentation, there's the idea of like the modern composer, like composing with MIDI on a keyboard, like a MIDI keyboard on like a music program, or using Pro Tools or another DAW. But you write out your material by hand. I love your sketches. I love them in like their kind of sloppy imperfections and everything else. They look really great to my eyes. Do you physically move like the pages
Oh yeah.
around to find your order? What's the transition like between your handwritten sketches? And I know you have really great engraving chops.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Transition.
Yeah. Well, usually when I'm writing, I put it on the walls. My walls become almost like a storyboarding sort of idea where I cut it out. I cut, old school cut and paste, cut out the music, paste it up on the wall. My studio's usually filled with like wallpaper, and that's how I write. And I have whatever affliction is, if I don't see something in front of me, I totally forget about it. And so everything I write, if I'm working on a piece, it has to be spread out or I forgot I wrote it. And
is that informed? Sorry, just before I forget, do you feel like that's informed by Nils Vigland?
No,
it's a totally separate.
Totally separate. I think Nils, if anything, encouraged me to be like, that's cool. Like, I used to think it was a deficiency that I'm like, oh, I gotta like, have everything post-its and, like nothing's in order ever, why can't I ever, I'm also like dyslexic, it's like, the idea of things being in order it's hard for me, and so, so I've come up with these kind of like coping strategies that ended up, again, being something that instead of being negative, I affirmed it, where I'm like, oh, I lose track of things. Well, great, tape it on my wall, like a crazy person, but then I write a good piece from it. And so, usually the sketching, I love writing by hand. I love the speed of your brain with the speed of the pencil or the ink. I think notating directly into the MIDI or into the Sibelius program is a terrible idea because you can write way too fast. And music, you need to let it like brew a little bit, and you need to touch your notes. You need to touch the thing you're making. And when it's in just a copy and paste, you can poop a lot of notes out in Sibelius. And to me, I know a lot of pieces that sound like poop because they're just pooped out Sibelius pieces. And to me, the writing by hand just connects me. Also, you can do a lot more when you write by hand. And then, but it's important though, the finished thing being a beautiful score that professionals can read. And so I think, basically going from sloppy wall, schizophrenia on the wall to, the published thing, it's a long road, but that's the process. And, so far it's working.
When you're thinking about how, like, I assume when you're talking about structural issues, you're not just talking about orders of material, but like proportions of material and things. Do you look at things and sort of count them through, hear them in your head, sing them? Do you play them? How do you deal with sussing out intuitively the proportions of a thing?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, I remember when I was writing my like piano concerto a couple years ago, I would like put the cello about 15 feet away from the piano, and I would run between the piano and the cello to see how the resonance was, in that space. When I wrote for, the Loadbang piece, What is the Word? I just found my diagrams where, I basically, the way I wrote the piece was I imagined the four of you as like a quad, like a square, and the sounds are being passed around. And like that allowed me to write the piece. And of course, in the score, you wouldn't even know that's how I got there. But yeah, so I think I'm like very analog. I don't know, like we have bodies. Also,
does that have to do the Beckett? I'm curious, sorry to interrupt. Does that have to do with that Beckett, the Beckett Play Without Words, where it's the
piece called Quad? Yeah. Nothing. I did not know anything about that when I wrote, but I know
that's a really wonderful coincidence.
Yeah, totally is. Yeah, I just feel like I stumbled onto like Beckett procedure on accident.
I wonder, so as like I don't know how you think, because I think of you 100% as a composer, but I know that you also have this like really important job with Shot Publishing and are responsible not only for making your own scores look beautiful, but also making so many other people's scores look beautiful. And I wonder, do you, as someone who like spends what I imagine is a fairly significant part of your day looking at other people's music and dealing with this sort of typesetting and all of this work. Does it one, does it influence your work, or two, do you feel like you have to actively separate the two so that it doesn't get involved in any sort of negative way?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, but the publishing job is a job, right? So there is a degree where it's a professional job where it has nothing at all to do with, me, spray painting my walls with my notes or whatever. But when it comes to like engraving, there's a standard, there is a history to it that's quite important. And also it's just, I don't know, I think like, I used to say, music or, notated music is 51% the score, 49% the sound. And now I flip that around. I say, well, okay, music that's notated is 51% the sound, 49% the notation. And I know people get pissed when I say this because they're like, no, fuck notation, like doesn't mean shit. And I say, sure, you can say that, but as a performer, when you look at something that looks good, it changes. There's, it's a very analog relation you have to the thing you're going to make. And, beautiful scores will sound beautiful, there's a look to it. You want, it should look good, and I think composers that have good scores are professional, and composers with shitty scores, I feel bad for. I don't know, but composers aren't engravers either. And I think that's something we should know, is that, we've kind of conflated recently in the last 40 years or whatever, that composers and copyists are the same person. And they're really not. Like a composer, it's not, they should learn how to do basic notation, but it's a whole other skill set to be an engraver. And, at my publishing job, I hire actual engravers to do the engraving. And composers, I tell them all the time, I'm like, you're not an engraver, like, and that's okay, but it's a skill everyone should have. But I will tell you this: I failed music notation class in grad school. So
I was just, this is like probably way too much to bite off with 3 minutes left. But I was just thinking as I was reading, it was like reading an article, and the editor, right? Like editors are so important in writing. And I was just thinking about how much better some music would be if there was an editor. Like, just so, like, the piece is, like, really, really good, but what if someone was like, I don't know, does it really need... Like, I wonder if you ever think, like, being in your role in publishing, do you ever make, like, even the slightest editorial stuff, or it's just purely...
Absolutely not. I think that's a whole can of worms. That
we got 2 minutes.
I mean, it's a can of worms to open up with any other composer. I think like that's why you have friends and like, alcohol to kind of tell you that your piece is too long or whatever. But yeah, musical editor, that's not my job. But, I always, publishing is, we publish good music, bad music, we publish all kinds of music, and the publishing apparatus is sort of a neutral thing, and, the quality of the music, that's not necessarily my role. I mean, it is on some level because I curate a publishing platform, but, at the end of the day, it's sort of like, I recognize that we live in a big world and there's going to be kinds of music that I have nothing to do with. And the edit I'd give them is delete your career or something, so.
Wait, can we end on that?
I was just going to say, this is a perfect place to end. Scott says, delete your career.
Right. Right. Apply all. Please apply all.
Well, Scott, this is so fun. Thank you for joining us. We could do this for another hour and a half, but we'll spare everyone.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. Thank you for listening. We have a couple really exciting ones coming up. Marty Epstein will be with us soon. Alex Temple will be with us soon. So thank you for continuing to support these, for continuing to watch these. As long as you keep watching, we will keep making. I don't know. Maybe that's a promise we can't keep, but we'll keep doing them for a while. Thank you again to Scott, and we will talk to you all soon.
Bye, guys.
What is the